All right, everybody, it's 11 o'clock. I want to thank you again for joining us for today's webinar titled Digital Transformation in Oil and Gas Services. I would like to go ahead and introduce Matt Pfohl, Senior Vice President for Sopris Systems, and he'll get us started. Matt?
Thanks, Bill. So as Bill said, my name is Matt Pfohl. I'm the Executive Vice President of Sopris. We're part of a portfolio of global companies of Sonata. We specialize in digital transformation. In particular, our division focuses on service-based companies and oil and gas field services being one of the markets we focus in on. I'd like to go to our panel. Jim, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Matt, thank you. Yes, this is Jim Burkeholder. I'm with Microsoft, and I'm in the business application practice specializing in oil and gas.
Okay, thank you. Bala, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Matt. I have a long name, so you can call me Bala. I run the global digital transformation and the Platformation business at Sonata. Focus on cross-industry segments, both the consumer-centric as well as the industry-heavy segments, focusing specifically on digital strategy and transformation.
Thank you, Bala. Peter, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Peter Purcell, Managing Director of Trenegy. Trenegy is a non-traditional consulting firm helping oil and gas and specifically oilfield services companies eliminate inefficiencies, the root cause around systems, process controls, and organization. And Matt, I wanted to thank you and Jim for, having us on today.
As you can see, this will be a panel discussion. I think we've got a very interesting panel. Our goal with this presentation is very much thought leadership and to give a point of view perspective from multiple key stakeholders in the industry that hopefully you can have a takeaway as it relates to what's happening in the industry, how individuals are embracing digital transformation, and how different organizations like ours are helping customers with this digital journey. So with that, we're going to get started. So today we're going to cover initially digital transformation and what's happening in the market, both from our customers' perspective to understand what the impact is going to be to us directly, as well as one of the most important elements is really what we look at as maturity models. So kind of assessing what are the different elements of maturity, where might we be on that path, and ultimately how do we move from one stage to another. And then finally, we'll talk about a couple of different strategies, a couple of the key, what we call DNA elements that are needed for successful transformation, and ultimately some potential low-hanging fruit of where organizations get started as it relates to their digital journey. So when we look at transformation from an industry perspective, one of the first things that we think is important always to look at is really what's happening with our customers and what are the conditions and the environment that they're dealing with that ultimately affects us from a downstream perspective and really forces potential changes in our business and how we interact with our customers. So I'm going to go to our panel. Peter, I know you've been in this market for a very long time and helping companies create efficiency and also adapting technology. Can you give us some perspective as it relates to the shifts that you're seeing and how you're seeing that impacting oil and gas service organizations?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so if you were to, take a look at the top line here on this slide, there are just a ton of competitive activities going on in the oil and gas space. Everything from, focus on, the push to going to renewables to geopolitical activities, that drove the downturn in 2015, 2016, and that we're recovering from now, all the way to just pure regulatory shifts. And what that's done is that's driven, E&P companies, right, oilfield services customers, E&P companies, to use technology to drive out inefficiencies. The only way to compete against an OPEC is to have low lifting costs, right? So you you use technology to drive out those inefficiencies, and that's what we've seen the E&P companies doing. Everything from downhole technologies being, everything just as simple as, MWD, LWD type stuff, to new technologies on exploitation, using fracking to, increase production and deal with declining curves, to even back office systems where you have an integrated supplier experience so that your overall cost model is low. But there's just a lot of things going on in the industry, and the results, right, of the E&P companies effectively using technology, again, not just only downhole, but what could be conceivable back office, is we've doubled production in the United States between 2000 and 2018. Even through the downturn, we still were increasing production. We're exporting oil, and the bottom line is that the U.S. oil and gas industry survived the geopolitical challenge, if you will, that occurred in 2015 and 2016. And I think, yeah. So, if Jim wants to address kind of what some of these or some of the technologies that are being used, that'd be great. Or Matt, whatever.
Yep, Jim, and loved your perspective of kind of what Microsoft is seeing as it relates to the oil and gas field services industry, and how some of these impacts are forcing change in how they think about technology.
Right. No, Peter, thank you. That's a great lead into what we're seeing from Microsoft's lens. Is we're seeing our clients coming to us looking for a more strategic partnership as they start to, I'd say, digest the evolution that's taking place, and from that partnership, really starting to set what we call the digital agenda. Now, the agenda itself is not only just understanding data and solutions, and we'll talk more about that later this morning, but really how this digital change really affects their internal organization as well as their partners. So it could be their vendors and suppliers, it could be their customers, and how they interact and engage internally as well as externally, and changes in those processes and culture. Some of the key elements of this agenda are really going to be based on outcomes. That's typically where we like to start our conversations of, in this evolution, what are some of the outcomes that companies in oil and gas are looking for? Is it increased production by a certain percentage? Is it productivity increase? Is it cost reduction? Is it market share capture? And based upon those outcomes can drive to decisions, for instance, like value-based contracts. Are we, as a oil field service organization, should we move away from just selling a product and then selling services to selling, I would say, a value-based contract that's based upon performance? Or do you go all in and sell concepts of like valve as a service, et cetera, or productivity as a service, or look at reduction of drill time to reach its goals? And then as we move across this, as from an implementation to really enable these outcomes, is from a strategy standpoint, do we need to move to a common platform to break down data silos and really start to set that digital strategy to enable, I'd say, vision into the business of what's happened, which we typically have done pretty well in the past, but actually start to look around the corner and understand what could be happening and start predicting so the business can be more agile. So the incorporation of a platform to break down those data silos is imperative in most cases, to really release that data so you can really start understanding what it's telling you.
Thank you very much, Jim. So I think it's, when you look at kind of statistically what's happening as it relates to what the market opportunity is, we're at a critical tipping point as it relates to, historically, We saw pockets of opportunity to improve efficiency, or we saw pocket opportunities to improve profitability, and so on. What you're seeing is massive opportunity at a value-based level at very high percentages. And so as a result of that, what used to be something that, you know, a handful of companies started to look at applying technology to improve the different gains that we just talked about. It's becoming table stakes to compete as an oil and gas field services company in the industry. Peter, you know, what are you seeing as it relates to this space?
Well, as we've come across and we've helped clients, you know, implement kind of a platform to ensure connectivity. I mean, seamless connectivity back to their clients. We see incredible results in byproducts, actually. You know, like an indirect byproduct under field is, you know, if you have an integrated field ticketing system, you can do a lot better around QHS&E, which, you know, reduces your TIR and, you know, injuries and things like that. Assets run better. Again, in an integrated environment, you have the ability to track asset utilization even, so you're doing better billing, but asset utilization from a maintenance perspective, you know, what's the runtime on a particular top drive? And, you know, we need to do some maintenance so that, you know, we don't end up with blackleg and, you know, a dead rig. And then overall in industry, the more connected, you know, our customers are, the more competitive they are, which then encourages other people to kind of go down this path as well. And you know, it does things like reduce DSO because your invoices are more accurate. You're getting your invoices with a company man's signature back to your customer faster with all the you know, the signatures needed. And so, you know, you get better payment, less contract leakage. So we see a huge impact across the industry for folks who are taking advantage of this.
Great, appreciate that input. And I would just close on the fact that, particular on this slide, is specifically, I think what we're seeing a massive change is, you know, to date, we've been very focused in the service business as it relates to how do we, you know, create a more efficient, streamlined operating model and, you know, ultimately drive better profitability and utilization and so on. But the shift that we're seeing because of the potential gains is that our customers are coming to us and looking for solutions to help them improve their business model. And I think that's a really big fundamental shift that we're seeing. So what does that mean to us? That means that when we look at investing in technology, when we look at improving business process, that ecosystem now becomes that much more important. So as we look from kind of past what the what's been going on in the market, the next is really looking at kind of the maturity model, specifically as it applies to digital maturity and where we might be in that journey. So I'm going to go to Bala, actually, who has some very interesting insight as a digital officer and helping a lot of companies through this journey. Explain kind of this roadmap and where different entities or companies fall.
Thank you, Matt. So I think this is if you really look at the 4 quadrants, right? I'm very tempted to really qualify them as 3 myths of digital, because digital today, from an organization perspective, right, is a deluge, right? Everyone wants to go digital, and so are the oil and gas service providers, right? Many are not sure in terms of how do we go digital, right? I think a meaningful approach to digital, right? So 3 myths of digital. So if you really look at companies who are thinking digital, right? Typically the beginners, right? And then you have companies, I would typically call them as irrationally exuberant on technology, right? And then there are challengers where they're already on digital, they're executing digital, they have several digital initiatives, right? So broadly, if you really look at every industry segment, be the heavy industry, like the oil and gas or the mining, every industry segment is getting consumerized. but there's some characteristic difference which we see. I think most of the oil and gas service providers and the other heavy industries are probably in the first wave of digitization, right? If you really look at a performance index of companies, of disruptors, essentially, in other industry segments, and if you compare that with the oil and gas, right, I think the average of the oil and gas and the energy somewhere between is about 1.8, and the disruptors in the other industry segments are somewhere between 3 to 3.5. So there's a significant difference. So I typically call the digital maturity of the market in itself as more evolutionary rather than revolutionary. Okay. So our focus essentially is on the top right quadrant, right, where we're calling the digitally matured visionaries, right? What are some of the typical characteristics of some of these companies? I would like to qualify them as saying that not necessarily every company needs to be a visionary, right? I don't think there is anything that's right or wrong about a digital strategy. I think it's something that works, right? Works from a business maturity perspective. That's the X quadrant, and then the platform or the technology perspective. So we have a set of parameters that we map both from a business and the technology perspective that really gauges where exactly the organization is from a maturity perspective. But if you really look at 2 or 3 critical success factors for those visionary quadrant, you see that the digital agenda, right? In fact, more than 50% of companies across industry segments do not have a digital agenda. So these are the visionary quadrant really constitutes about 5 to 7%, right? And every company probably is in a transition, and I see that average even more slightly lesser in the oil and gas services segment. So the critical success factors are really the digital agenda. Do we have a platform mindset? I will explain what a platform mindset is as we come to subsequent slides, right? But then the message here is that everyone is on a digital journey, right? And it's extremely important for a self-assessment of where you are on the digital journey before you embark on a digital transformation journey. And that's the essence of a maturity assessment.
Yep, and I would just add to that is really, kind of where do we engage in something, or where do, companies kind of successfully kind of go down this path. And where we see success in the market is where it's being driven at an executive leadership level in combination with the technical leads and maybe even third party. So it's a bit different kind of from the bottom up. This is really from the top down as it relates to successfully moving from being a beginner to a visionary. So we'll talk about kind of maturity throughout, and ultimately how do you some of the elements of technology that we could be dabbling in versus kind of what a successful plan may look like. So as we look at strategies, there's a couple of components to Bala's point, and that is there are fundamental building blocks that are needed from a technology perspective, as well as alignment of the business. And I think the key component that, I think what we see in the market is people that are, it's the definition of digital transformation and or platformation that is very blurred. And as we'll talk later in the presentation, it's not one thing. It's not the perfect platform. It's really about a method and a lens by which you look at all technology investment, which could be made up of multiple vendors and multiple solutions, but that they need to be aligned with a particular vision. So Bala, with that, if you can walk us through kind of the building blocks.
Yeah, I think the sum and substance of this slide essentially, Matt, is about the platform thinking approach, right? It was only a few weeks back, I was with one of the oil and gas leaders, right, in the industry segment, and another company, which was probably a mining, which is also has a close corollary to this industry segment. And both these leaders had a specific slide on the Amazon strategy, right, as part of their digital transformation strategy, right? So in essence, I think in the asset-heavy companies will really need to take a cue from born digital companies, right? Can you take a platform thinking approach, which is why most of the born digital companies are successful today, and can you adapt that to your industry segment, right? And that's what is our structured approach, wherein we engage with traditional companies specifically, right, to align them to a platform mindset, right? And we call this structured approach as our unique approach to digital transformation, which is what is called as the Platformation. And it all starts off with the digital agenda, right? We help you create the digital agenda if you do not have one, or if you already have one, I think we have contextualized it. The second really one is, as Matt was mentioning in the previous slide, in terms of a top-down approach, right? Creating a shared vision, program outcomes, right? And then we get into a strategic platformation, sort of a roadmap, which we think is always a 3 to 5 year journey and not a 3 to 5 month typically. But then however, I think the 3 to 5 year is really superscribed by incessant quick wins, right? And then of course, a midterm to a long-term sort of a sustained strategy and roadmap. And what comes out of this, of course, we look at the platform strategy from 2 or 3 dimensions. One, of course, is the platform mindset, right, which is what we call as the business sort of a platformation. We look at the entire ecosystem of an oil and gas services sort of a player. And what I typically talk to companies here is take an outside-in approach. Value is not really essentially created just within the organization. Value is, with the advent of the internet and with the advent of the entire platform ecosystem, value is being created both externally as well as internally, right? So I think platform and platformation is really about orchestrating this value, orchestrating this ecosystem, and that essentially has 2 or 3 layers. One is the ecosystem or the business layer. Second one, of course, is a sophisticated technology and which is all being interplayed by data, right? So our platformation approach essentially looks at the interplay between each of this. You could start either a business anchored or a technology anchored or a services sort of an anchored platformation approach, and then it leads into execution. And as part of execution, I think we have customers who say that, hey, we want something that's ready-made, right? For certain industry segments, I think we have certain ready-made born digital platforms, and certain segments like the oil and gas, I think we are in the process of creating platforms, right? I think, for example, I think Peter was talking about contract leakage, right? We're talking about asset utilization, right? We're talking about field ticketing, right? So how do we really translate the ecosystem into platforms? And so that's about the Sonata Sopris ready platforms, and then you have the Accelerate, which is essentially leveraging the industry-based platforms like the Microsoft platforms, and then of course the custom platforms, right? In essence, what we are saying is, for an oil and gas service company to be truly digital, right? So we're looking at what we call the platformation principles of being open, scalable, and connected and intelligent, right? Is what we call as the platformation principles. Truly digital companies are those companies that are really open and that can orchestrate the ecosystem outside in and inside out, that are infinitely scalable or maybe reasonably scalable, right, in terms of geographies, users, right, and they're well connected and also intelligent enough to sort of orchestrate data, right, be it from an exploration perspective, production perspective, drilling, development perspective. Can you really generate insights based on the data across the value chain, right? So I think the platformation approach is our unique method and philosophy approach, consulting-led approach, where we typically start from the C-suite, sort of an engagement, and then we lead it down to a 3 to 5 year sort of a roadmap and implementation.
Jim, I'd like to go to you on this, and just kind of curious is, within this framework, where are you seeing customers engage? Are they starting at the digital level? Are they starting at a more platform level? Are they starting at a technology level?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, Matt. I mean, clients come to us, I'd say, at different entry points, but most commonly where we start to get engaged is when they start really wanting to partner around outcomes. And working with them and yourself and Peter really putting some definition around those outcomes and the strategy around how to achieve those. What we commonly see is it's just a lot of data silos across these organizations. So just the idea around having a common data platform to build upon, and that could be around analytics, right, to be delivered to the enterprise to unleash some of that value, and or start to really enable the business with business processes around the new data platform to really drive those efficiencies and value they expect to receive to achieve their outcomes. I mean, it's an exciting discussion, and the companies that I'm working with, this is the common discussion I'm seeing across the board in oil and gas, from E&P, the service providers, midstream as well as downstream. So how do they really start to break out of these data silos and really surfacing that data to do something with it?
Great, thanks. So as we move down kind of into the strategy discussion at a deeper level, we start to kind of uncouple the core elements and some of the discussions we had before. I'm going to go to two panelists on this one. Bala, from a digital perspective, kind of the building blocks, and Peter, from a business process perspective, key elements through this journey. So Bala, let's start with you.
Yes, Matt, I think continuing upon the previous slide, right, also sort of building up on what Jim was really talking about, data-centric, right? I think what we're seeing with customers today are essentially three sets of levers wherein value is unlocked because of digital and digital transformation, right? One is, how do you unlock value from the core, right? And I think it is really digitizing your core business. So from an oil and gas perspective, I think we're really looking at, can you really digitize your service propositions to start with, your field service, right? Upstream, downstream, right? Can you digitize your service interactions? Because we feel that's where the first level of value unlock happens, right? And I think that really starts off by understanding the data components, the insights, and the decision making that comes through those insights. So that's why we typically start with a foundational data platform that really feeds into the core platform, right? Service platform that we're talking about, right? So the first essential value unlock is around digitizing the core business, right? And in this case, I think we're really looking at the upstream, the explorations, and the downstream, as well as and in terms of the drilling and the production as well. I think once you digitize the core, you can leverage data as an asset, right, to really build adjacent service models. Right? And that's what we really call as a second phase. Typically, is creating adjacencies around your service propositions, right? And then the third one is really when you have adjacencies, and then when you have already digitized the core, right, both outside in and inside out, you get a 360-degree view of the integrated enterprise of the oil and gas ecosystem that you've sort of built around. You can really create newer interactions, right, with your customers, with both upstream and downstream, right? Orchestrate the ecosystem and create newer growth in business models, revenue models. And that's really the third stage, right? And with most of the customers that we are engaging, I think the first phase in itself, the digitizing the core service proposition, which is really orchestrating the workforce, Uberizing the service force, building an integrated service transformation models, all being leveraged through data and insights. I think that in itself is about a year to a couple of year journey. I think most of them are somewhere there, right? And then the next and the reimagined phases are really for organizations. I've been interacting with a couple of them, right, who've already started off this journey, but then they understand that this is going to be about a 3 to 5 year journey at least to really reimagine themselves as a service provider, as an orchestrator of an ecosystem around the service provider sort of a proposition, right? So this is typically the platformation roadmap that we engage. But this is a broad template, but then very specific to the oil and gas services spectrum. And these are the sort of the building blocks of the roadmap.
So Peter, two perspectives, knowing that you all are really helping organizations for many years in this space around process improvement and change management impact. You know, this whole digital journey, what are you seeing as different today as it relates to how we have to think about or how we transform our culture, as well as some of the process impacts we should be considering?
Yeah, I think that if you were to look at how the oilfield services companies have typically been built, right? It's all through acquisition, mom and pops, very highly entrepreneurial owners, being bought and brought together, liking to do things their way, pen and paper, throwing lac meter readings, on a piece of paper on the dashboard of your truck, and, having somebody in the back office entering them later, now being pushed by, the large independents and large independents to say, hey, I want my data real time. That's a huge cultural, shift. And, getting people to think about using technology. And if I go from left to right, I'll just use some examples, having real-time reporting, moving to integrated field ticketing to, now all of a sudden, I have to put in a nice ERP because I'm manually interacting with the supplier experience portals, that Shells or Chevrons or Exxons are forcing people to use. But I need an ERP and I need automation because I can't manually input my invoices anymore into Ariba and those types of products, right? To when companies embrace making all that happen, make the changes, and employees actually starting to use these new tools and living in a platform environment. When I look at T4, we actually have clients who, and this is unheard of, but they're doing fixed fee drilling contracts if in certain basins, because they know exactly what they're getting into because they have all this information and they have this integration. The other thing is that, we have fracking customers who have sole sourced with, a lot of their customers just because they are integrated. The jobs come in and, go directly into the sales order system, generate the ticket, and, the fleets run. So I don't know, Matt, I hope I answered your question, but it is fairly significant and very positive.
No, that's excellent. And, I think the challenge we see is kind of how we've done business in the past and the thinking of how the business has been run for so many years and moving to this more connected world where there's more accountability in our action. There's more reliance on technology, which we, in the past we've got some very, experienced, organically grown up in the organization people that just instinctively know, how to do things or, how to optimize, a particular job or service that we're providing. So it's a very interesting shift that we're seeing as well. So as we look at the kind of the core elements of what we talked about before, which is this whole sense of, what are the key elements specifically to this kind of open, connected, intelligent, scalable, specifically as it relates to oil and gas services. I'd like to go to both Bala on this one as well as Jim, and Bala, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so Matt, I think if we were to embark on this journey, right, if an oil and gas service provider will have to embark on this journey, then what does it really mean, right? Here are some use cases, right? Maybe Jim and Peter can weigh in as well here, right? We were saying that a truly digital business, right? And if you're really going to reimagine yourself into an ecosystem or sort of a platform orchestrator, right? You would really have to be open. And what does that really mean? It means, can you orchestrate, can you seamlessly integrate with your partner ecosystem, for example, right? Can you seamlessly integrate your sales, marketing, right, and your back office internally as a platform within your organization? I know Peter was talking about ticketing, we were talking about contracts, we were talking about newer service models moving from a fixed cost structure to a variable cost structure, right? So how could you really open up your organization and seamlessly integrate from a business IT perspective, right, with your partners and bring in newer ecosystem partners to bring adjacencies around your service models and transform, right, to become more outcome-based? I think that's what really is open is all about. And when we say connected is all about, I think all of us are we're very familiar with the omni-channel paradigm, right? We're very familiar with the retail segment or the consumer segment. But I think omni-channel is really becoming common across several industry segments today, just not the consumer segment. I think the industry asset-heavy segments like oil and gas, right? You need to be omni-channelly connected, right, with your equipments, sensor-driven IoT paradigms, right, across channels, across your devices, across upstream, downstream, across your exploration, production, development. That's what we're talking about, building connected sort of ecosystem. Right, scalable is really about. I think Peter made a very good point about M&A, mom and pop, right? Really aggregation of segments. So how can you really scale your business as well as your technology and data infrastructure across geographies, across businesses, across different facets, both of your internal and external sort of ecosystems. And then you're intelligent. I mean, intelligent is all about. I think if you have a platform that's being engined and powered by data, right, which self-harnesses each of the inputs that comes out from each of the of your ecosystem layer, or can really feed you insights about predictive maintenance, can really bring in those improve your EBIT because of some of these operational improvements, significantly makes your asset operations very smart, right? Bring in cases like your reputation management for your workforce, right? Also bring in adaptive learning, training, pricing, forecasting. So I think these are parameters where oil and gas services companies typically can up the ante and raise the bar if they really have to score high in terms of the digital maturity and go with the platformation roadmap. Right, so these are specific use cases which we thought are relevant. And what does it really mean to be open, scalable, connected, and intelligent for O&G companies?
Thanks, Bala. Jim or Peter, you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, this is Jim. I'd say very quickly, I mean, the discussions I have with oil and gas service providers is, today is you've got to be agile. It's a very volatile market. I know it was a tough fourth quarter for a lot of the service providers, with some recovery hitting in the first quarter. But their ability to have insight with what's going on and having a platform to give them an ability to have those insights, but also to be able to adapt is more critical today, it seems like, than in the past, because a lot of their clients that they service are incorporating these platforms and getting these insights and making decisions sooner. So being a service provider within the industry really means they need to be able to adapt as fast or as soon as their clients do. And having these different components in play and having an adaptable platform to meet the demands of the business is more critical than ever before.
Great, thank you. So when we look at it from a kind of perspective as it relates to, so if we look at taking the digital journey, we look at adapting, we look at putting together a digital agenda, what is the kind of hypothesis if we go down that path, or what can we expect? And so, Peter, I'm going to go to you on this as it relates to the type of impact we're seeing or results we're seeing as it relates to how far down the digital path an organization may be.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think we've covered a lot of this in previous slides, so I'll be very, very quick. The bottom line is that if you were to go back and refer to the maturity model that Bala brought up, is today E&P companies, to be efficient for exploration, production, exploitation, etc. They're requiring integration. I mean, oilfield services companies are being pushed in this direction with whether they want to go there or not. But if they get there, there are significant benefits. And as you move up, in the maturity model, and you move towards a platform environment, which actually is not hard to get there. And Matt, I think your future slides will definitely show that, right? And we have some other sessions that you're hosting that we'll talk in greater detail. There is significant benefit and profitability. Of course, everybody is excited about that. Everybody wants that. And, these are numbers from, a select, group of our clients and market research that we've done. But how do you get there, right? And that's always the question. It's pretty simple. We've hit on these before. Reduce DSO because, when you're in a platform environment, you're giving your customer exactly the information they need to make a decision about making payments to you. And invoices aren't rejected. Contract leakage, reduce contract leakage. What does that mean, right? That's much more accurate capture of things that you have to build, consumables, labor, services, simple stuff. And then lastly, asset utilization. Sounds weird, but we've had clients where they have actually lost, track of where are 15 of our frac tanks that we're leasing out. We don't even know where they are, and we don't know if they're being used. So by going to a platform and using technology and, IoT and a variety of other things, all of a sudden you don't lose that. So there is significant benefit. This is not implementing technology for technology's sake.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Peter. So to Peter's point, when you look at, in our discussion, I think the key thing is that it can be overwhelming. I think, again, the misunderstanding of really, what is digital transformation? It's an overused word. There's some low-hanging fruit that we can take advantage of. I think the key being is that the building blocks of that mindset we talked about, which is this open, scalable, connected, intelligent, is really a lens and or a guide by which we should be using as both business leaders as well as technology leaders on how we invest and leverage technology to drive better business results. And so when you look at it from a platform perspective, this could start with as simple as what we call canvas apps or non-code apps. So maybe it's a matter of improving how we get inspections from the field, back to the office, to what we talked about before, which is kind of the multi-stages of analytics. So is it a matter of being able to pull data from the field into a cloud environment so that we can process the data at a much more efficient level to then take action on the operational side? Or are we looking at, we've got a mature analytical model and we want to take it to a cognitive level so that we can leverage things like AI and machine learning to help us start making better decisions and get us on the track as it relates to focusing on the activities and outcomes and the execution that we should be doing? Or is it something that really starts with, our back office is a mess. We've got to start there. We've got to put the foundation in before we can start looking at more innovative technologies. I think the key element about this slide is that there's no right answer as it relates to what we see as necessarily one product versus the other. It more comes down to your strategy and also those 4 key pillars being part of that strategy. And so customers come to, I think, all of us to solve, in some cases, that entire journey. In other cases, it's very specific to what we've identified as a priority and an opportunity that we can create some immediate gain from digital type of strategy. Jim, anything else you want to add as it relates to kind of Microsoft's position in architecture?
No, I think I think you nailed it. It's not all or nothing, and people can pick their points of entry based upon their business demands. And I know most clients start off this journey in Office 365 and now incorporate pieces of Cortana intelligence, and with the core data being in Azure, and then be able to use that data, incorporate other data sources to build on that platform and break down some of those data silos. What we're seeing now in the market is clients really focusing on breaking down the data silos. That seems paramount in a lot of the companies that we deal with today, and it brings in that application platform layer. So you think about what we call the Power Platform. So it's Power Apps, BI, and Flow. But probably most importantly is really that common data service, Matt, and really using that layer to be able to incorporate, like for instance in Dynamics 365, incorporate Office. So you think about Teams. If people are familiar with Teams, be able to, this is an example, you could use an asset and it has its own teams, and each asset could have its own thread and share that knowledge across the enterprise. And specifically, if you think about one of the early slides, enabling people in the field, giving them the information they need to be successful on their jobs. That is just an example of that. And be able to incorporate, Azure through Connected Field Service into the business application to take action on the alerts and data coming from the field. So, our strategy is really to provide the platform and tools to allow our customers really to accelerate that transformation in their organizations.
Yeah, and I just would end with, I think what strategy-wise, as well as I think what you all have done a good job at, is that recognizing the fact that most companies have a major investment in legacy technology, and so it's not something we can do overnight. So how do we start to modernize? It is the fact that we put a more modern mobile wrapper to start gaining innovation and efficiencies in the field, or is it looking at fixing certain components, of that? But I think what's radically different that we see today is that it's not an all or nothing. We can start that journey in incremental elements. We can use a strategy like Platformation to look at helping us prioritize where's the best investment to spend based on our business outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and ultimately allows us to start putting the foundation into transform at whatever maturity level we decide. So I'd like to go to one last slide here, just as an example, and then we're going to open it up to the Q&A. Jim, I think this is one of your examples that you all.
Yeah, this is Matt. Yeah, this is a very simple example, really illustrating. We call it connected platform, and the solutions. If you think about the prior slide, this includes a lot of different elements of the total platform. So, just if you have a connected asset, and this example is a top drive, and and collecting data from there, with the idea that that data would go to an edge device and up into the cloud, where an alert in this example goes directly, let's call it a command center. Once that alert gets there, a couple things happen or could happen. We see clients actually running workflows and see if the issue can be corrected from the command center without actually dispatching somebody. That's nirvana, of course. It's not always the case, but if you actually have to send somebody out to make a fix, you want to make sure you have the right people, somebody close. So you think about logistics with the right skills, tools, as well as parts to make that fix. So making that determination before you actually schedule and dispatch somebody out to make the job. And once it gets out, the technician gets out there, making sure they have the right information. So they can receive that alert, understand what's going on, at least from the data that's been received. So that's a big improvement in a lot of cases from a knowledge perspective, but also a couple of things we're starting to see take place within industry is you think about somebody goes out on location, they find something they're not familiar with. In some cases, like Chevron is a use case out in one of their plants, is using mixed reality and be able to have SMEs on call anywhere in the world available to support a technician out at a plant. So again, driving to health and safety, first time fix, all those great things that can happen with having the right people at the job at the right time. And then lastly, closing it out. So you capture that data and you can use that data to continue to train your models, your predictive models that in machine learning.
Great insight, Jim. Thanks for walking us through that. Thank you, panelists, for your input on today's presentation.
Fantastic. But if anybody left out there has other questions or would like to reach out to one of the presenters individually, you all should have emails from us that you can reply to. Or as you can see on screen, you can send an email to m.pfohl@soprasystems.com, and he can connect you with Peter, Jim, Bala, anybody on the group. So we really, really appreciate you all spending time with us today. If you have any feedback on the presentation or if there's other content you'd like to see, let us know. Don't forget, there are 5 more events in this series as well. We're going to send you a link after the event where you can see the other 5 events dealing with everything from preparing for and implementing ERP, field services, to advanced business intelligence and machine learning. So again, presenters, thank you guys for the time today.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to the audience. Bye-bye. This will conclude the Digital Transformation in Oil and Gas Services webcast.